Then when the auto companies, when Henry Ford developed the first assembly line, and that first factory is over in Highland Park. All you have to do is go north on Woodward Avenue. You run into the first mass production, auto production facility that was produced in the United States. I think it was built in 1908. This revolutionized not only the automobile industry, but it revolutionized capitalist production in the United States and throughout the world. As a result of that, we had a large influx of not only African Americans, but other people from parts of the South and from all around the world that came to the city of Detroit to work in automotive factories. In 1913, Henry Ford, right on the eve of the beginning of World War I, went into the southern part of the United States and recruited African Americans from the sharecropping and plantations production facilities, offering them $5 a day, which was a lot of money in 1913, to come to Detroit to work for Ford Motor Company. Most people in the South who worked as tenant farmers, as sharecroppers, were only making 50 cents a day during that time period. So they were being offered 10 times their amount in salary. So people flooded to the city of Detroit, beginning right on the eve of World War I, extending through World War I, through the 1920s, even during the Great Depression, all the way through World War II, where there was another large influx of immigration, all the way into the early 1950s. So we had many, many African Americans who came into the city during that time period. Just to give you some figures on this. During the years of 1916, 1917, over 30,000 African Americans migrated to the city of Detroit, just in 1 year. At the beginning of 1920, the African American population had increased by more than 600% over what it was just 10 years before in 1910. By 1925, another 40,000 African Americans had relocated to Detroit, just over a 5-year period, doubling the population of African Americans, making it approximately 7% of the city's population. This migration of African Americans in Detroit went unmatched by any other city in the industrial north other than the steel center of Gary, Indiana, which also had large African American migration during that particular time period. Now, the interest of African Americans in large numbers into industrial productions was carried out in a manner which perpetuated the division of the industrial workforce along racial lines. This division served the aims and objectives of the owners of capital by promoting racial antagonism and the fierce competition for jobs and housing. For example, Ford Motor Company was the largest employer of African Americans in the auto industry. However, it kept African Americans largely confined to the Rouge complex. Outside of Detroit, Ford refused to hire African Americans as production workers, but only as menial workers. A lot of them worked as janitors and other type of menial jobs in the plants. And all African Americans were confined to the most menial, dirtiest, low-wage jobs in the entire industry of auto production. Now, the fact that Henry Ford had hired 12,000 African Americans in plants by the mid-1920s, Henry Ford I held a tremendous influence in the African American community in Detroit during this time period. His philanthropic assistance to Detroit African American churches gave his political views tremendous exposure in the community. The Detroit chapter of the NAACP was heavily based in the churches since its founding in 1912. Consequently, the organization became a recipient of large donations from Ford Motor Company and other auto executives. In addition to the influence among the churches and the NAACP, the Urban League of Detroit, which was founded by the Employers Association of Detroit and the Community Chest in 1916, was instrumental in recruiting African Americans into the auto industrial production in Detroit. These factors served to promote a leadership subservience to the auto giants in Detroit. The NAACP, the Urban League, and many of the leading churches in Detroit remained, for the most part, up until the 1940s, heavily pro-management and anti-labor. And this brought about a huge struggle, particularly during the late 1930s and 1940s, in regard to efforts by the UAW to organize in the African American community, because a lot of the leadership in the churches, as well as some of the civil rights organizations, was subservient to Ford Motor Company. Actually, Ford Motor Company used to recruit through the churches. They would go to a lot of the ministers of the leading churches and ask for applicants to apply for work at Ford Motor Company. A lot of the other corporations did the same thing. So it was a major struggle during the 1940s when the UAW made a concerted effort to organize African-American auto production workers largely because they were being held back to a large degree by these churches and these other so-called civil rights organizations that were operating at the time. Now, the question of the working class struggle and national oppression, we have a lot to learn from our experience here in the city of Detroit. As I mentioned, Detroit was a center for auto production. But at the same time, it was a deliberate effort made on the part of the auto executives and the power and money interests in the city of Detroit to divide the working class along racial lines. In terms of housing, there was tremendous discrimination in the city of Detroit. Even within auto plants itself, I talked about the discrimination against African Americans within the auto production process itself. Also, there was tremendous police repression as well in the city of Detroit, largely directed against the African American community. So, during the 1940s, there was two major racial uprisings, or racial outbreaks of violence in the city of Detroit that had a lot to do with determining the developments in the preceding decades during the 20th century. In 1942, there was a housing complex that was built called Sojourner Truth Homes on Detroit's east side. And because of the racism that was promoted by the auto executives, like Henry Ford, for example, he was one of the most virulent propagandists of racism that this country has ever known. Not only anti-black racism, but also anti-Semitism. He had a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of the Dearborn Independent newspaper. It was really fascinating. Just to go back and read, there's a book called The International Jew, which was actually published by Henry Ford, but it's a compilation of articles out of a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. And in that book, you will find some of the most virulent anti-Semitism that you ever want to read. It's some of the most virulent anti-Semitism I've ever read in my life that was actually produced and circulated by Henry Ford. He was an opponent of U.S. involvement in World War II, even though he benefited and profited tremendously from the war industry. In fact, he was even awarded by the Third Reich for their assistance in the reindustrialization of Germany after the conclusion of World War I. And the reason why he promoted this type of racism and anti-Semitism was to undermine any type of working class unity in building a working class movement and the union movement in the city of Detroit. Although he had this image of being the first industrialist to hire African Americans in auto plants. In fact, the city of Inkster, which is next to Dearborn, was built specifically for African Americans, whereas Dearborn was built specifically and built up specifically for whites. And for years, they wouldn't even allow African Americans to move into the city of Dearborn, which is right outside the city of Detroit. So the national oppression is a key factor in the historical development of Detroit. Even in building the UAW, it was very, very important. Because a lot of African American workers, in order to organize them, they had to defeat racism even within the white working class movement itself. And in 1941, there were some key developments that took place. For example, Paul Roach came here for a rally right in downtown Detroit in 1941. And he played a very key role in building the type of working class unity that was necessary in order for the UAW to be recognized by Ford Motor Company during that particular time period, leading up to the commencement of World War I.